It's early morning, April 13th, 1996, in Coral Gables, Florida, on the campus of the University of Miami. The world is just starting to wake up inside of one of the on campus housing apartments. A door won't open. At first, it seems like it's just stuck a swollen frame, a stubborn hinge. But when Earl Little, a University of Miami football player, leans his shoulder in and really pushes, he realizes the door isn't stuck. It's blocked by a body. He finally forces it open just enough to squeeze through, and what he sees on the other side will haunt him for the rest of his life. His best friend, his teammate, his roommate, 22-year-old linebacker Marlin Barnes, lying on the floor, beaten so badly that his face is almost unrecognizable. Blood is everywhere, up the walls, across the door, spattered so high it reaches the ceiling. Wood splinters are scattered across the floor like confetti from a nightmare. A shotgun lies in pieces, broken from the sheer force of the blows. And on the floor, a single unfired shotgun shell. This wasn't a shooting. This was a bludgeoning. An explosion of rage. As police began to clear the scene, someone notices something else. In the bedroom, there's another body, a woman, breathing. She looks like she's been dragged, beaten just as viciously as Marlin, but she'll be airlifted to the hospital. Her name is Timwoknika Lumpkins. She will not survive. Hey, family, it's Steph, and this is Murder in the Black. Today's episode is a bit heavy. There's jealousy, control, and a lot of details about the murders. I want to caution you to listen with care. But this case shakes an entire community. We're talking about the murders of the University of Miami linebacker Marlin Barnes and Timwanika Lumpkins, and how their story echoes nearly 30 years later. And occasionally, you're going to hear from my husband, Joel. Say hi, Joel.
Hello.
University of Miami fan to help us understand what the U meant during that era and how this case hits home. But before we talk about the evidence and trials, we have to rewind way back in time to who Marlin was before his name ever appeared in a headline. Before he was a hurricane, before ESPN, before the newspapers, Marlin was just a little boy in scout housing projects. He loved football as a small boy, obsessed with it, really. He played in the streets, in the yards, anywhere there was space. He and his friends would sit around and watch the University of Miami games, the Hurricanes. And back then, in the late 80s and early 90s, Miami was that team, one of the top programs in the entire nation. To kids like Marlin growing up in Florida projects, athletics, especially football, became a haven, a way out, a way to escape an environment that didn't always offer hope. His mother, Charlie Pastel, was determined that her family would not be defined by the projects. She hustled, picked up another job, worked late, sacrificed sleep, time, and energy, all for the dream, a better life for her children. When Marlin was 17 years old, Charlie did something incredible. She bought her first home. They moved to Miami Gardens, and their family thrived in the new environment. Safer, more stable, a place where a young Black boy with big dreams could actually imagine a different future. And Marlin had one dream in particular, the University of Miami. He didn't travel around visiting other schools in his senior year. He wasn't weighing his options. He only wanted to go to the U, also affectionately the Hurricanes, the Canes, or simply the U. There was just one problem. Getting there wasn't as easy. He wasn't as strong academically, and he had to take the SAT multiple times, but he didn't receive the score he needed to go. So a coach from North Miami Senior High School pulled him aside and said, look, you've got talent, but your grades and your test scores have to match it. You should go to military school, learn some study habits, get serious, and then come back. Joel, have you heard of athletes doing that, doing an alternative route, military school, or anything else that you are aware
Yeah,
of?
that's pretty common. Yeah, especially kids who don't have grades. You probably last what, I don't know, 20, 30 years, probably even prior to that. But JUCO, junior colleges, you see a lot of talented kids who don't have grades go to JUCO, go there, play for a little bit, maybe get their grades to a certain point, and then they'll transfer back to a Division 1 school.
Cool. So how long do they do that? Do they do that for like a year and a
Typically, it's a
half?
year. Yeah, typically a lot of those kids will do just a year and then jump back to the Division 1 school.
That's what Marlin did, and he was determined to make sure he achieved his dream. So he listened. He went all the way to Chapman, Virginia to attend a military school where there was structure, strict, and they had expectations that were extremely high, but he met the bar. His grades were improved. He retook the SAT, and you combine that with academic improvement with his already athletic talent, he finally received a scholarship to the University of Miami. He became the first child in his family to attend the college. It was a proud time, not just for Marlon, but for his entire family. Charlie sacrificed in the very beginning to get them out of the housing projects, and his determination to make sure his dream came true solidified this portion of his dream. Now, Joel, you're a Hurricanes guy through and through. And when a kid from the project gets into the U on scholarship, what do you think that represented for their family at the time, considering their background?
For the family, they're excited. They're probably looking at him as a I don't want to say meal ticket, but you'll probably look at them as a success story. I think that's probably the biggest thing. They're probably the first kid in their family to go to college, let alone like a Division 1 school like a Miami that's on TV, has a history of winning or just a good history. And then also with Miami being that kind of, well, started as a private school, it's highly touted, especially as a kid, probably from Florida. Just people look at it in high esteem. So definitely, family looked at it as a great opportunity.
For sure. And that's exactly how it was. He was not just representing, athlete dream, but also going into the educational field, being the first person to graduate from college and just dreams realized. I want to talk about the University of Miami Hurricanes in that era because I think this particular era defines what we know about the University of Miami, or at least what I know. And in the late 80s and early 90s, the U didn't simply play football, they dominated it. They had swagger, they had national championships, they had a reputation that stretched across the country. And some of the names that came through the program are straight up legendary. Joe, I know about Michael Irvin only because I'm a Cowboys fan, but Warren Sapp, Ray Lewis, they also have Reggie Wayne, and later on, Sean Taylor, Clinton Portis, and we've covered Sean Taylor here on Murder in the Black. And that's just some of the names, just to give you guys context of people that came out of the University of Miami. Joe, do you want to contribute any more to that?
Probably a good one for football is Dwayne the Rock Johnson. That's a big name. He played football there as well. Willis McGahee. You just got a list of just top talent that's come out of Miami from the '80s up until the 2000s, 2010s, really.
With the U during that time, I really wanna bring it, like, centering in on this context. Now, we're 87 babies, and, he was a young adult at this time, right? Like, his freshman year, he went in '94. But just for you to paint the context of how illustrious the University of Miami was at the time and him ushering into that new era, how would you describe the U at this time to somebody who has no idea what that represents?
But the youth really coming off of the late '80s. Of course, Jimmy Johnson, you know that name from Dallas Cowboys, but just that time of just winning, dominating, big, I don't want to say saying, but swagger. They said the U invented swagger. So you had homegrown talent, Florida kids from the projects that came up in played football and just really dominated. So they brought that rough and ruggedness out that I would say college football wasn't used to seeing. So you had a lot of excitement and dancing and celebrating and just, full on just acting crazy on the field. And so you're kind of coming off of that and kind of still in the midst of that and having the talent that's coming through, like you had mentioned, the Michael Irvins, big name guys that have come through, especially during that time, have just kind of ushered through. So now you have these next breed of kids that are coming up, wanting to emulate that and also wanted to be a part of that history and culture that Miami has, bred from that previous years leading up to that early mid '90s time frame.
That gives us exactly what Marlon was walking into when he enrolled as a freshman in 1994, and he played linebacker and was working toward a liberal arts and science degree. By 1996, he was a junior who had enjoyed some successes on the field. He was on the squad with Ray Lewis. His best friend, Earl Little, was right alongside him. The two had grown up together and planned for years to attend the University of Miami together, and they fulfilled that dream. They were wearing the iconic uniforms, living out their dreams. And Marlon and his mother remained very close as he was there in the same city. They talked often. And life, at least on the surface, seemed to be moving in the right direction for Marlon. On April 13th of 1996, that same Saturday morning, before the news breaks, before the chaos, Marlon's mother, Charlie, is at home and she gets a call from the mother of Marlon's ex girlfriend. And she asked Charlie about Marlon, wanting to know where he was. So Charlie just tells him, well, he's at school. She gets off the phone. She thought that was a little weird, but kind of just discounted it as a one time occurrence. A little later, she gets another call, this time from Nate Brooks' mother, another person in Marlon's circle. Same kind of question. Have you heard from Marlon? Again, Charlie says he's at school, but this time she can kind of tell something's not right. You know how that you have that pit at the bottom of your stomach that just, I'm just getting this call too much. This isn't what it should be. She once again feels something's not right, but the person on the other end of the line doesn't say anything else. They're just like, oh, okay, he's at school. She gets off the phone, her heart is pounding, she's full of dread, as most mothers are when they receive mysterious phone calls like that, and she decides to page Marlon. Now, mind you, this is the 90s, and paging somebody was the way of communication at the time. She pages him, and normally he would automatically call her right back, but he didn't. And she doesn't know what to think. You don't have news alerts, and the news is traveling homegrown. People are calling but not giving direct answers because they're not sure of what she knows. So when he's not calling her back, she picks up her stuff, starts to pack up her things to get ready to go to the University of Miami to find out what's going on. Soon after, the reports start popping up and there's been a double homicide on campus. So parents are calling, students are starting to check in, and the quiet Saturday morning at the U suddenly feels like anything but safe. Now, this is when Earl Little comes home, and he gets there around 7:30 a.m., and he just wants his keys. Now, I want to paint this picture for you guys. Earl Little, Marlin Barnes, Ray Lewis, they all live on these on-campus apartments, and it's not clear to me if it's like 2 to a suite, 4 to a suite, but Earl Little and Marlin definitely live together. He's trying to get into his apartment so that he can actually get his keys back from Marlon because he allowed Marlon to borrow his car the night before. And that's when he encounters Marlon's body blocking the door, lifeless. So, of course, he calls the police and they arrive around 7:30 to 7:35 a.m. The scene was completely brutal. Now, the blood splatter went up to the ceiling. And if you know anything about crime scenes, as I know you guys do, the impact of the blood splatter only travels how hard a person is being hit. So the fact that this blood splatter reached not only the wall, but the top of the ceiling lets you know the passion that was involved in this brutal beating. Wood splinters were everywhere from what they believed was a broken shotgun, although there was not a shotgun on scene, but there was an unfired shotgun shell on the floor. They believe this is probably a robbery gone wrong. But what they find out, that is not what it seemed to be at all. There was cash found in Marlin's pocket, and Marlin's chain that he often wore that was worth money was still on his body. This was not a robbery. In the bedroom, they found a young woman later identified as Timwonika Lumpkins, and she appears to be dragged and beaten severely as well. Now, she was still breathing, although Marlin was found dead. She was breathing and they airlifted her, but she did not survive. Miami-Dade County actually handled homicides in that area. They took over the investigation. Now, the crime was shocking, not only for its brutality, but for where it happened. It was on campus at the University of Miami. And very quickly, word spread. Students were horrified, parents terrified, and people start asking if this can happen here, it can happen anywhere. Joel, I want you kind of to engage with me just for a second before we get back into our story. I just believe that schools, colleges, especially elementaries, high school, junior high schools, they should be places where it's safe. Oh, and I think when things like this happen, it's not that we are so naive to believe they're not safe, but you think that young people are there. There's enough safety precautions, and especially for Marlin, as he was a player at the University of Miami, you would think that people are patrolling. I mean, what do you think when things like this happen? Is it a reminder that just evil is everywhere and we should always be on guard? Or what do you just think about the overall safety of when you hear stories like this, like double homicide?
Yeah, I think you can have an incident happen anywhere. I went to school, University of Alabama in Huntsville, where we had a mass shooting. It was taken was it was executed by a teacher, a disgruntled teacher. And so you just never know where or how, something may be executed or what may trigger someone or what some, interaction may have happened on or off campus. So just because you're on campus doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be safe because, still regular people walking around and it's not like well, in a sense, you have schools that are barricaded, but it's still ways for people to get into a school. It's not like it's a jail and it's locked down. I hate to say it, but par for the course, but it's, you can leave it up to human. They'll find a way to make something into trouble.
We can't talk about this case and only center it around Marlin, although often when this case is told, that's what it does center around is Marlin because he was a part of this illustrious team. He had rags to riches story. But the truth of the matter is someone else was killed in that apartment that night. And her story deserves to be told as well. Her name was Timwanika Lumpkins, and she was not attending the University of Miami at the time. She was not a student, but she was a friend of Marlin. They had known each other since grade school and matriculated through high school together, and they just remained really good friends. And she was a beautiful young woman. She had a young daughter, and her family was absolutely devastated by her death. She wasn't just someone in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was a mother, she was a friend and a loved one. And the connection between her and Marlin would become the key to this entire case. To piece together what happened, investigators called in all the University of Miami players. They needed to reconstruct the night before. And here's what they learned. On Friday, April 12th, Marlin was invited to a VIP party at Club Salvation in Miami Beach. It was hosted by a Dolphins player. Marlin invited Tim Monica and they drove there in Earl Little's Ford Explorer. At the club, they linked up with one of Marlin's teammates. When the night was over, they went back outside and they noticed that Earl's car was leaning a bit to the side. The tires were clearly damaged and someone had slashed his tires. And so Marlin's teammate, who was going to catch a ride back to campus with them, decided that he would just get another ride because he didn't want to wait for the tow truck. And so Marlin and Timwanika stayed behind to wait. And the tow truck eventually arrived and dropped them off back at Marlin's apartment sometime between 5:30 to 6:30 a.m. At this point, the detective started to build up some really good pieces to the puzzle of what happened. Like, obviously, there were two victims that happened at the college apartment, and there were slashed tires that seemed to be caused by somebody else. They were still trying to build their case. But in between them trying to canvas the area, LeBrant Dennis enters the story. And Timwanika was his girlfriend, or at least she had been. They had been on and off again in a relationship for about 5 years, and they shared a 3-year-old daughter. Up until a week before the murders, they had been living together. Then, after a night where she had come home late, allegedly after spending time with Marlin, things exploded. LeBrant got angry. Timwanika took their daughter and went to her grandmother's house. Joel, what do you think about a woman who's choosing to leave a violent situation, but it's already fueled by some abuse? Do you think she's safe by leaving, or do you think that can present a problem?
I think it's twofold. It can be she is getting away, and it depends on how well she gets away. I think that could be a positive thing. But, you have these situations where you get away, and then, like you said, you have the guy who is still maybe in the picture or around or has the access to that person. It could be, deadly. No pun, well, pun intended. Because you never know what they may be thinking or how crazy they may be. So you can still have that kind of ties to that person, which could affect other people that may be around or helping that person when they're trying to escape. So
That's kind of what we see here. In the days after the murders, LeBrant does something very interesting. He shows up to the detective's office on his own. Now, this on its head is very unusual, not what we're used to seeing here on Murder in the Black. And most people let the police come to them, whether they're innocent or guilty. It's kind of like, if you want to get some information from me, you're going to have to come see me, and you might even have to talk to my lawyer to get to me. But he walks in and he seems cooperative, and he offers up his own version of events. He said that he loved Timwanika. They had a 3-year-old daughter together, and claimed that he had nothing to do with the murders. And as a matter of fact, he offers his own alibi. He says he went to a bachelor party around 11:30 p.m. on April 12th, and then he went to Club Salvation. Now, if you remember, Club Salvation is where Tim Wanika and Marlin went, right? But he claims that he didn't see them while he was there. And eventually he decided to just go home and go to sleep. He even allows detectives to take pictures of his arms, his face, and any other parts of his body that they wanted to. And this is particularly interesting to me because I told you about the viciousness and the violence that took place in that apartment. And one would think that if it was playing devil's advocate, if it was LeBrant, maybe he would have defensive wounds all over himself, and there was none that detectives saw. I think that's pretty interesting. Although he could be the usual suspect, it's looking like he's not. So, of course, detectives look at his alibi, and this is where they find out that his alibi checks out. His cousin confirms where he was, and his roommate backs him up that he came home and went to sleep. And police just don't have enough to keep him. They don't have the evidence that it would take to keep him. And while they keep him on the radar, he drops down from being their main suspect. Hey, what's up, y'all? It is Steph. And before we dive deeper into our episode for today, I've got a quick reminder for you. We're growing our Murder in the Black community over on YouTube. And to celebrate, we're hosting a holiday giveaway as our thank you for helping us expand. It's super simple to enter. Head on over to YouTube, subscribe to our channel, pick any video, and leave a comment. That's it. You're officially entered. The giveaway ends November 30th, so don't wait, y'all. Tap the YouTube link in the show notes and join the fam over there. Let's grow together. Now, let's get back into our episode. Now, investigators head on over to Club Salvation to canvass the area, and it is there at a gas station a couple of feet away from Club Salvation that they talk to their most important witness. It was a gas station attendant. They saw a man in the early morning of April 13th in a gray Nissan sitting in the car of their parking lot for hours. This woman says she was not able to see the man's face because he covered his face, but she did notice that his car had no tags. She asked him to leave after he didn't seem like he needed anything from the gas station or any service, and he didn't. So she calls the police. And when officers arrive, that's when this individual decides to leave. But as soon as the police leave, he comes back. Then she watches him get out of his vehicle and walk over to the Ford Explorer. Remember, the Ford Explorer is what Marlin was driving that night. And then she sees Marlin and Timwanika eventually come outside, get into the tow truck when it arrives, and the man in the gray Nissan leaves the area at the same time they get into the tow truck. So police show her a picture of LeBrant's car, right? And she confirms, no, that's not the Nissan. This person was driving a Nissan. So once again, investigators are kind of scratching their head because they think LeBrant's involved, but they just cannot confirm that he is. Yeah, they can't prove it with evidence. They have to keep moving forward. They interview Charlie, Marlin's mother, and they ask if Marlin had any enemies. Did he have any recent disputes, trouble with anyone? And she has no one to give them. And to be quite honest, this is something that we see often in true crime stories. When you talk to the victim's family, they often say, like, I don't know of anyone who would perpetrate a crime on my loved one. And I think when it comes to this particular case, though, I really do feel there was nobody who really wanted Marlin to die, have any ill will towards him. He seemed like he was a good guy who did not have any enemies. He got along with most people. But obviously, that wasn't the truth. They find out through one of Marlin's friends that he was involved in a program in the area called Right Track Forward Foundation. It was a group that was working with the youth in the area to leave the gang life and to focus on education and football. And they started to wonder, could someone target Marlin because he was trying to encourage the youth to get out of the gang life and to pivot? It was a possibility. But then they discovered a tip that a gray Nissan was burned. Detectives decide that they would go out to the gray Nissan, see who it belonged to, and take photographs of the car. They took those photographs of the car to the gas station attendant who knew all the tea about what took place in the early mornings of April 13th. And that's when she confirms that that was the car that she indeed saw in the early mornings. They, of course, track back to see who the Nissan was registered to. It was registered to Watisha Wallace. And police track her down for a formal interview. And that's when she tells them an interesting story. She is the girlfriend of LeBrant Dennis, and that she purposely burned the car herself. Now they have a couple of things working in their favor. They had that suspicious Nissan. They're now able to connect it to the gas station attendant to the Nissan she saw in the early mornings. Now they have a direct connection from that car to LeBrant and an ex-girlfriend, Timwonika, who is the victim, and a prior domestic dispute. They are starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together, but they still needed more evidence to take to court. And a tip comes in through their hotline that if they wanted to solve this case, they needed to speak to a man by the name of Joseph Stewart. Now, Joseph knows LeBrant. They actually work together. And what's interesting here, Joe, I want to hear your take on this as we dig deeper into it, but I want to kind of keep you up with the story because this is Joel's first time hearing this story. He doesn't know anything about it. But Charlie, Marlin's mother, worked with LeBrant. She knew who he was because Timwanika and Marlin were good friends. And she didn't know him intimately, but they were aware of each other's presence, right? Because Timwanika would come over the house. She knew that LeBrant and Timwanika were dating. And since Marlin played for the University of Miami, they would often talk about football. That was like a fixture, that was their favorite team. They would talk about Marlin being on the team, talk about Timwanika, just casual talk with your coworkers. And Joseph also worked with LeBrant and Charlie. So I want you guys to keep that all in mind as we continue to talk about this case. When they go and talk to Joseph, he insists that he didn't harm Marlin or Timwanika, but he does admit to something huge. On April 7th, just days before the murder, LeBrant calls him and asks if he has a gun. He says, "Yeah, I do. I have a shotgun that belongs to my mom. If you want to borrow it, you can." LeBrant comes and borrows the shotgun. On April 13th, after the murders, LeBrant calls and says that he's returned the shotgun to Joseph's mother's house. He left it outside in a bush in a black duffel bag. So, of course, Joseph goes outside to retrieve the bag, but it feels heavier than before. And inside, he finds a black hoodie, sweatpants, boots, a knife, and a shotgun that is severely damaged, with key pieces missing, including the trigger guard as well. Joseph calls LeBrant and tells him that I don't want to have nothing to do with anything that you've done. Like, basically, what you got me caught up in. And LeBrant responds by saying, "Don't worry, they won't come looking for you. And I didn't even drive my car." He thinks his plan is solidified, right? On April 29th, detectives bring Joseph in for a formal interview and they ask him where the shotgun and knife ended up. And he actually shows them the exact spot. It was in the sewers, which is kind of nasty because diver teams had to go back and recover it, but they were able to recover the gun and the duffel bag. They see that the shotgun is damaged, chunks were missing, the trigger guard was gone, and if you remember, at the crime scene, they already found a shotgun trigger guard. They found large pieces of wood on the scene, and they had that unshot shotgun shell retrieved. So everything starts to come together, and this is enough evidence that they need to arrest LeBrant Dennis, and they do so on April 30th of 1996. Charlie Postel, Marlin's mother, is stunned by the arrest because she knows LeBrant and she also knew Joseph. They worked together, they spoke socially. She knew that him and Timwanika were a couple. And so for her, she's trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Why on earth would LeBrant want to kill my son? Because Timwanika and LeBrant were dating. She was devastated by this news. Joel, now knowing all the pieces here, what what do you think happened here? If I told you to guess, what was your working theory here? What do you think went
It
wrong?
seems straightforward, but maybe I could be wrong. But yes, it seems like the Brant maybe have used not his car and went to go maybe try to intimidate Timwanika and Marlin and trying to maybe, I don't know, could be scare him and maybe not take it any further, and maybe something happened where it escalated and it, went down the wrong path. But it sounds like initially maybe he went to kind of, try to intimidate them and it kind of got out of hand.
Investigators now piece together a more complete timeline. April 6th, if you remember, was Marlin's birthday. This is when Timwanika comes home after hanging out with him and gets into a heated argument with LeBrant. He's furious. She moves out, taking their daughter to her grandmother's home. Now, Marlin comes back at some point during that time. We don't know exactly when, but he helps to move her boxes and belongings from the house she shared with LeBrant to her grandmother's home. April 7th, Joseph gives LeBrant his mother's shotgun. By April 12th, the VIP party at Club Salvation, Marlin and Timwanika attend together, riding in Earl's Ford Explorer. LeBrant is believed to be in the area. Tires are slashed. Early April 13th, the gray Nissan is seen lurking at the gas station. The tow truck drops Marlin and Timwanika off at his on-campus apartment between 5:30 to 6:30 a.m. And police believe that LeBrant watched and waited for them to go inside. And then when he went into the apartment and the shotgun did not fire the way that he expected, something snapped. And that's when he beat their faces over and over with the butt of the gun. He hit Marlin so many times that he literally broke the gun. And this amount of rage that has to be inside of a person to carry out this type of brutal murder is is amazing to me in the most cruel way. And all the while, this is being portrayed in some corners like a love triangle. Did you think that this was a love triangle, that maybe Marlin and Timwanika were dating behind LeBrant's back? Did you what was your context of a relationship, or just what you thought as I was explaining this story?
No, I guess once you kind of describe kind of their relationship and the history that they had together. I kind of threw the love triangle thing out the window just because they had been friends for so long. That's what made me think of maybe it was just an intimidation tactic that he tried to pull, just because I guess it is a possibility they could have been dating, but just not the first thing that comes to mind when you look at someone with a long history of friendship.
That's what Charlie's mother saw in the media when this story first came out, because this case was solved very quickly. And I think there was pressure, right? Because it was at the University of Miami, it was a double homicide. But this case was solved quickly. There was still room for speculation about the nature of Timwanika and Marlon's relationship. Charlie, Marlon's mother, stands firm that they were just friends and he was helping her out of a domestic violence situation, exactly the kind of thing that Marlon would do for someone. And honestly, what Charlie encouraged him to do and what he saw his own mother doing, there were several instances in Marlon's childhood where Charlie had to help her friends get out of a domestic situation and just trying to do the right thing. And so that's something that Marlon was known for, and something that Charlie wants to make sure is not the narrative in this story, because, far too often we hear about love triangles. The death of Marlin rocked the football program and the community. His funeral was huge. Over 1,000 people came to say goodbye: teammates, coaches, friends, family, and fans. Ray Lewis was in attendance. Many Hurricane faces, known and unknown, came to pay their respects. Earl Little stood and spoke at his best friend's funeral, honoring the boy he'd known since the second grade, the teammate, the roommate, the brother he found at the U. Around the same time, Tim Wanika's family held her funeral, laying her to rest as well. Her loved ones were equally devastated, a young mother gone. Parents and students all across the city asked themselves, how did this happen? A month after the murders, on May 8th, 1996, a grand jury indicted LeBrant Dennis on 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of burglary, assault and battery while armed, and criminal mischief. Prosecutors believe the case was clearly premeditated, pointing to the fact that he asked Joseph for that shotgun on April 7th and returned it only after he murdered both Tim Wanika and Marlin. They sat down with Charlie and told her that they were going to do everything they could to seek justice, but they realized they could not bring Marlin back, and that would be the only true justice that could be served. But they wanted to bring some semblance of justice to the family. On October 6th of 1998, the trial started. Marlin's family was there every single day, and the trial was long and emotional, brutal, lasting 5 to 6 weeks. LeBrant's defense leaned heavily on the idea that Joseph, which is laughable, could have been responsible for the death of Tim Wanika and Marlin because, after all, it was his shotgun. But the combination of witness testimony, physical evidence, and timeline were too much to overcome. On October 28th, 1998, the jury returned a verdict: guilty on all charges. Then came the penalty phase. The jury recommended the death penalty, and LeBrant was sentenced to death row. When the sentence was read, this is when LeBrant showed the most emotion that we ever saw from him, especially during the trial. He started yelling, thrashing, and had to be restrained by the guards. But even that wasn't the end of this case. In July of 2017, everything changed again because the Florida Supreme Court decided that death sentences based on non unanimous jury recommendations were unconstitutional. The rest, for Charlie and the rest of the family, it felt like the murder happened all over again because they overturned the ruling. They had to go back to court, back through evidence, back through pain. By 2025, resentencing case finally made its way back in front of a new jury. Prosecutors argued to reinstate the death penalty under the updated Florida law, but the new jury saw it differently. In November of 2025, this month, nearly 30 years after the murders, LeBrant Dennis was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the families, it was another blow. They wanted the death sentence restored, but the law and the jury decided otherwise. Charlie has said, and I quote, "I'm not getting my kid back anyway." She believes that whatever man's justice fails to do, God's justice will not. Before we close, I want to go back, not to the crime scene, not to the person, because Charlie always reminds people Marlin wasn't just a victim, and neither was Timwanika. He was a fixture on his team. He was voted most improved football player just weeks before his death. He was dedicated, a hard worker, always willing to lend a helping hand. Someone who had dreams of going to the NFL and someone who worked with the right track forward foundation to help young people leave gangs and focus on school and sports. He lived his life pouring into others, friends, teammates, and kids in the community. And Timwanika, she was a young mother, a friend, a woman trying to escape a dangerous relationship and deserved a long life as well. They both did. Joel, now knowing this whole story, the legends, the culture, this young man from Scout Housing Projects fighting his way into that world, what sticks with you most?
I guess the possibility of what could have been. You see probably all of the guys and players that came before him and after him, and you just wonder, could he been in the rafters with the other guys? Just a life cut short just off of really just being a good friend, it seems like. So that really what sticks out. It's like, could he be in the pantheon of greats that everybody speaks of when you talk about Miami?
I appreciate that. And for me, sometimes people say that monsters are made, they're shaped by their environment. And I think that is true, their trauma. But I want to highlight that really it's about the choices that we make. And LeBrant made a choice. Violence was his choice, rage was his choice. And the ripple effects of that choice are still felt to this day in the hearts of two families, in the memories of a football program, and in the lives of everyone who love Marlin and Timwanika. Until next time, friends, this is Murder in the Black. Thanks for joining us, Joel. We'll see you guys next week.